commemorating American heroes who stormed Fortress Europe, all coming up on this episode of The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
That order was issued by General Dwight D. Eisenhower just prior to the invasion on June 6, 1944, to encourage Allied soldiers taking part in the D-Day invasion. The Allies had been planning to invade since the day German forces took France in 1940. The mission was to be a cross-channel assault on the German occupying forces, ultimately codenamed Operation Overlord. By May 1944, nearly 3 million Allied troops were amassed in southern England, waiting for the moment to arrive. The largest armada in history, made up of more than 4,000 American, British, and Canadian ships, had assembled off the coast, and more than 1,200 planes collected at airfields across the country of England. Against a tense backdrop of uncertain weather forecasts, disagreements in strategy, and related timing dilemmas, Eisenhower decided before dawn on June 5th to proceed with the mission. Later that same afternoon, he scribbled a note intended for release, accepting responsibility for the decision to launch the invasion and full blame should the effort to create a beachhead on the Normandy coast fail. Much more polished is his printed order of the day for June 6, 1944, which Eisenhower began drafting months earlier. The order was distributed to the 175,000-member expeditionary force on the eve of the invasion. So this week marks the 75th anniversary of the invasion of Normandy, and hundreds of thousands of people are expected to travel to the D-Day beaches for various ceremonies to remember the event and those who died. Speaking of casualties, to this day there does not exist an official count of D-Day casualties. The main reason for that was the simple fact that keeping track of 2.8 million troops is almost impossible to begin with. What we do know is this: over 37,000 Allied ground troops and another 16,000 airmen were killed during the Battle of Normandy, which includes the D-Day landings. Think about that. 53,000 men died liberating one part of France from the Nazis, and they were the winning side. It's estimated the Germans lost more than 200,000 men. The invasion was the beginning of the liberation of Europe, and it's something worth remembering. This week, I'm making my way to Afghanistan to spend some time with U.S. troops who are carrying the torch for those heroes from World War II. The world has changed a lot in the intervening 75 years, but one thing that hasn't changed is the necessity for good men to stand up to evil, even at the cost of their own lives and safety. So for the next few days, I'm going to bring you some special interviews and speeches and stories of heroism centered around the Normandy invasions, and I hope you'll enjoy them. Many of these interviews came from my friends over at the Defense Visual Information Distribution Service, or DVIDS as they call it, and they have my gratitude for collecting and saving these speeches and interviews for posterity. These will be episodes you will want to share with your kids, so go get them and let's get started.
This is the airplane that led the D-Day invasion. It's the number one ship in Normandy on June 6, 1944. It left from an airbase near London called Greenham Common. It made the round trip to the beaches and back. Somebody found the tail number, traced it down and found it in I won't say a junkyard, but it was in a restoration yard in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And they were lucky enough to get it before it was cannibalized and turned into another airplane.
It's unbelievable to think that all those men were in that plane also, and to hear the stories and know some of the people that came back.
Well, it's going to be quite an operation. We're going to meet several other airplanes in Oxford, Connecticut in the middle of May. We'll do a flight around the Statue of Liberty and then head to Goose Bay, Labrador. After Goose Bay, we're going to cross to Greenland, make a fuel stop, Iceland, overnight, then down to Scotland, Duxford, England. So other airplanes are going to meet us in Duxford, as many as 40 C-47/DC-3 types, and we'll drop troopers over the beaches of Normandy on June 6th. It's going to be historic. It's emotional. It'll be the last big gathering.
hour, and the enemy's hedgehog defenses are ahead. This is the supreme moment of invasion. This is frontal assault on an entrenched enemy.
Guys were getting seasick. Well, I don't usually get seasick, but I was getting pretty nauseated watching everybody else getting sick. You're like you're under fire all the time. They were firing from the shore, and they were firing over our heads into the beaches. That's the way we got up that hill. Those Bangalore torpedoes blew that barbed wire out of there. They just cleaned it. We have that thing in us, being a soldier. It can't happen to me. This is what's so outstanding about that. Those guys who were killed instantly, not very much suffering. And those of us who lived have suffered for them. I don't have a person I was with in the service alive today, outside of myself. So I'd like to dedicate my being here today to all the guys that are gone, that had served their time and that had left their bodies over in France. We weren't in the service for recognition. We were in the service to get Hitler out of the way. Hitler was our main objective. It was not the German people, it was Hitler. That's what we were all aimed at. But we had to defeat his armies to get to him.
If it wasn't for a GoFundMe page that was started by friends of his from Coffee, we wouldn't be going. So we have to give them the credit for us to we're actually going and making this happen. His dream was to go, and we just weren't going to go.
The girl said, "Go fund me, fund me," and I thought, what do they mean by they're going to funding me? No, it says, we're going to put your name on the computer, and people are going to send money in to support you. I said, you know, I could take a chair out of this bagel shop and set it out front and have a tin cup, and I'll bet you I receive more money in that tin cup than they'll do on that GoFundMe. I apologize. $12,000 and they only asked for 10.
To me, it's almost the cherry on top of his whole life. It is so incredibly important to him. He is so proud to go back and pay homage to his fallen comrades and his buddies, as he says.
I'm writing a book, and I've got it all written except the trip back is going to be the final chapter of the book. And the name of the book is The Luckiest Man in the World.
In the early hours of 6 June 1944, as the landing craft approached the shoreline of these beaches, ramps dropped and the enemy unleashed hell on earth. Enemy fire rained down upon wave after wave of soldiers as they struggled to shore. In those moments, heroes were born, sacrifices were endured, and the ground upon which we stand was made sacred to us all. Lieutenant Jimmy Monteith from Virginia was a young leader leading soldiers on the shoreline 73 years ago. He landed near Colville with the initial wave of American soldiers under very heavy enemy fire. In the first critical moments of the attack, Lieutenant Monteith could be seen running up and down the beach, rallying his men to assault the seawall. Monteith and his men persevered, forcing the enemy aside. And with that land secured, Monteith tenaciously retraced his steps back across that open field to the beach, where he found 2 tanks and their crews desperate to aid in the fight. The young lieutenant led his men to capture an advantageous position on a nearby hill. He supervised the defense of this newly won and hard-fought site against vicious counterattacks. The enemy's counterattacks continued, and Monteith and his unit were eventually surrounded. And while courageously leading his men's fight to safety, he was killed. This story of courage, gallantry, and intrepid leadership is one of 9,387 stories that rest here within this hallowed ground. On Memorial Day, we honor the men and women who died while serving the armed forces. This accounts for over 1.2 million service members from the time of the American independence to the ongoing conflicts in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Today is a day to renew our pledge to assist those for whom liberty is threatened and to free the oppressed. In doing so, this land and those buried here may gain a sense of our gratitude, and these actions will give further meaning to their sacrifice. And most of all, in this hallowed place that symbolizes the bond between the French and the American people, let us never forget the importance of friendship. Let us never forget the importance and strength of our alliance, and let us never forget that when people from France and America fight for the common purposes of liberty, equality, and fraternity, all is possible.
I feel like we need to spend more time elevating our heroes. America needs all the good men she can get. And when one gives his life like that, we need to make it a very big deal. You know, as the Bible says, greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. When I was in the Army, I had to deal with people asking me sometimes how I, as a Christian, could condone and even possibly participate in war. And so to answer that question, I memorized part of this quote by John Stuart Mill, and it helped me so much, I'm going to quote it verbatim for you as we end this episode of the podcast. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you back again tomorrow. It goes like this. War is an ugly thing, but it's not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling, which thinks nothing is worth a war, is much worse. When a people are used as mere human instruments for firing cannon or thrusting bayonets in the service and for the selfish purposes of a master, such war degrades a people. But a war to protect other human beings against tyrannical injustice, a war to give victory to their own ideas of right and good, and which is their own war, carried on for an honest purpose by their free choice, is often the means of their regeneration. A man who has nothing for which he is willing to fight, nothing which he cares more about than he does about his own personal safety, is a miserable creature who has no chance of being free, unless made and kept so by the exertions of better men than himself. As long as justice and injustice have not terminated their ever-renewing fight for ascendancy in the affairs of mankind, human beings must be willing, when need be, to do battle for the one against the other.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.